Tonight, we drift slowly through the long story of the Colosseum's other half, the missing wall, the vanished marble, the pieces carried away and repurposed, leaving behind the iconic half-ruin we know today. In gentle detail, we follow its journey, from the games of ancient Rome, through earthquakes and quarrying, through centuries as a fortress, a place of prayer, and even a wild garden, until at last we arrive at the Colosseum as it stands today, broken, yet enduring, a monument not only of Rome, but of time itself. This is the Bedtime history story, told softly and slowly, designed to help you relax, let go of the day, and drift into sleep while learning. Sources will be listed here, add academic references, travel accounts, and conservation histories. If you enjoy calming history for sleep, please remember to subscribe and join us again for more quiet journeys through the past. The Colosseum Hole. Close your eyes, and let us drift back through the centuries, back to the very first days of the Colosseum, when it was not yet a ruin, not yet a fragment, but whole. Picture Rome in the first century of our era, a city alive with marble and bustle, with the murmur of traders in the forum, and the distant sound of sandals upon stone streets. And there, standing proud above it all, the Flavian amphitheater, what we call the Colosseum. It was vast, so vast that from a distance it seemed to hover above the city like a crown. Travertine stone gleamed pale in the sunlight, each block fitted so carefully that the seams between them were barely seen. Four levels rose skyward, arch upon arch, tier upon tier, curving in perfect balance. If you walked slowly around its circumference, you would have traced an ellipse more than 500 meters round, and with every step the view shifted. Arches framing slivers of sky, statues watching from niches, shadows lengthening as the sun wheeled overhead. For those who first saw it complete, it must have felt endless. The outer wall rose higher than 10 stories of a modern building, with 80 entrances cut into its body, ready to swallow and release a crowd of 50,000. But in the quiet of morning, before the games began, the structure itself was silent. Only the pigeons stirring in the cornices, only the soft brush of a broom across marble steps. And so let us imagine it, whole and unbroken, at peace. A circle of strength, before time began its slow, patient work of dismantling. Inside, the light fell differently. You entered through an archway, passing from the brightness of the Roman streets into a cool, shadowed corridor. The air smelled faintly of lime dust, faintly of stone, faintly of oil lamps that had been lit the night before. The corridors echoed with your steps, the sound hollow yet gentle, as though the walls themselves were whispering. And then you emerged again into brightness. The arena before you, the seats rising in graceful rings, the sky framed in a perfect oval above. The amphitheater had been built with care for movement. Ramps and stairs carried people to their places quickly, smoothly. Spectators from every walk of life, senators in their marble seats, merchants with their purses, laborers and slaves with their simple tunics, all flowed inward like a tide. But when the arena was still, before the crowd arrived, the quiet was deep, and in that stillness, you could feel the immensity of the place. Above the stone, above the arches, the velarium waited, a great awning of canvas, rigged with ropes and pulleys, tended by sailors trained to catch the wind. When unfurled, it shaded the spectators from the summer sun, its vast fabric stretching like the sail of a ship adrift on the sky. Beneath it, the air stirred gently, carrying the smell of bread baked in nearby ovens, of olive oil, of the dust of the city. We are used to thinking of the Colosseum as ruin, broken, hollow, missing half its skin. But here, in these first days, it was pristine. Each arch was filled with a statue, bronze or marble, gods and heroes looking out across the city. Their gazes were steady, unchanging, as if to remind Rome of its eternity. Between them hung shields and decorations, polished to gleam. Torches at night would set the outer wall aglow, the travertine reflecting firelight. the great ellipse shining faintly against the dark sky. From the outside, the building was not silent. The city hummed around it. Carts rattled by, carrying amphorae of wine, loads of hay, baskets of figs. Street sellers called out, offering fried fish or honey cakes. Children ran laughing along the outer wall, weaving in and out of the arches. Soldiers stood on watch, their armor clinking faintly as they shifted. And above it all, the Colosseum loomed, a presence more constant than the shifting life around it. But tonight, as we imagine it, we strip away the noise. We let the sound of carts fade, we let the chatter of merchants fall silent, we let the footsteps die away. What remains is the Colosseum itself, still and whole. Its stones are cool in the evening air, cool as you place your hand upon them. Its arches are dark with shadow, framing only the pale light of the moon. The air grows calmer, softer, the pulse of the city receding until only the faint crackle of torches remains. To imagine the Colosseum whole is to imagine Rome in confidence. The empire stretched wide, across seas and deserts, across mountains and forests. And this amphitheater, this oval of stone, was its heart. Crowds would gather to see what Rome could command, beasts from Africa, slaves from Gaul, myths turned into spectacles. But beneath the games, beneath the roar, the building itself stood silently, patiently. Stone is never in a hurry. It waits. It remembers. And so here, at the beginning of our story, the Colosseum is still intact. It is like a vessel just poured, filled to the brim, unspilled. Time has not yet shaken its walls. Earthquakes have not yet cracked its curve. Builders have not yet come to steal its stones. For now it is whole. Let us linger a moment longer, and breathe with it. Feel the immensity of its circle. Walk slowly along its edge, hearing the faint whisper of your footsteps in the dust. Look up at the arches, rising tier upon tier into the sky, like windows opening onto the night. Watch the stars appear above, framed perfectly by stone. And as the city grows quiet, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the Colosseum itself, not in noise, but in presence. A stillness that is steady, patient, enduring. Like the hush before sleep, like the pause between one breath and the next. And in the background, the hearths of Rome kept crackling, their faint smoke curling upward into the darkening sky. Shaking stones. The Colosseum stood for centuries, strong and proud, its circle unbroken. Yet no stone, no matter how mighty, is free from the slow hand of nature. Rome rests on shifting ground, a land where the earth murmurs beneath the surface, where tremors ripple through the soil, where mountains nearby have their ancient volcanic roots. And so, as centuries passed, the amphitheater that seemed eternal began to feel the breath of the earth beneath it. The first shocks came quietly, almost forgotten. Small quakes shook the city, rattling shutters, stirring birds from the eaves, sending ripples across the waters of the Tiber. The Colosseum stood firm, though hairline cracks spread faintly across its travertine skin. But in the year 847, a great earthquake struck Rome. Walls shuddered, bells tumbled from churches, houses crumbled, and the mighty amphitheater groaned. Its southern side, heavier, softer in its foundations, bore the brunt of the tremor. Arches cracked, great blocks of stone loosened, entire sections fell in a thunder of dust and rubble. Imagine it, the night lit suddenly with the collapse of stone, the roar of earth shaking, the cries of startled citizens rushing into the streets. In the dark, the southern wall, once perfect, was broken. The ellipse, once complete, now carried its first great wound. What had seemed eternal had shown its fragility. The Colosseum did not fall entirely. The northern side held strong, its foundation steadier. But the break was clear. Where once the amphitheater had been a crown, it was now chipped, like a bowl with a missing rim. And so it remained, visibly wounded, visibly incomplete, though still immense and awe-inspiring. Another quake came in 1231, centuries later, shaking loose still more of the southern face. By then, Rome was quieter than in the days of emperors. Its population had dwindled, its grandeur was fading. And so, when the Colosseum trembled again, the stones fell not amid imperial guards and cheering crowds, but into a quieter city, a city that looked upon the ruins with less fear and more resignation. By now, the people of Rome were used to buildings falling, to temples becoming broken shells, to grand works of marble standing half destroyed. The Colosseum's wound became another scar in a city full of them. But nature was not only destroyer, it was also gentle caretaker. Into the cracks and crevices, into the broken arches, seeds began to fall. Dust gathered, rain washed soil into gaps, and tiny shoots appeared. Wildflowers grew where blocks had tumbled. Ivy crept across exposed edges. Little by little, the ruined sections softened, as though wrapped in green bandages by the hand of time. Travelers who came centuries later often remarked upon this sight. The Colosseum half broken, half overgrown. A mixture of stone and plant, ruin and life. In spring, it seemed almost like a garden suspended in the air, blossoms trembling among shattered walls, bees drifting lazily in the Roman sun. The great amphitheater had been scarred by earth, but in its wounds, life had rooted itself. Let us pause to picture it in quiet. The northern wall still rising proud, its arches steady, its tiers intact. The southern wall collapsed, jagged edges showing where blocks had fallen. Between them, silence. The arena empty, the stands broken, grass beginning to sprout between steps. A lizard darts across a sunlit stone. A bird alights upon the rim of an arch, then lifts away again. The ruin breathes slowly, gently, without need for spectacle or crowd. And the earthquakes themselves, though violent in their moment, were only part of the rhythm of the earth. Long after the tremors passed, long after the dust settled, Rome returned to calm. Markets opened again. Bells were recast and rang once more. Life continued, as it always does. And the Colosseum, though wounded, remained. Its missing half became a new identity. Pilgrims arriving in the city saw it not as a broken thing, but as a symbol, half whole, half lost, yet still greater than anything they had known. Chroniclers wrote of its fall with awe, noting that even in ruin, it surpassed the buildings of other lands. For even broken, the Colosseum was vast, its arches still dwarfing men and women, its curves still commanding the horizon. At night, when the city quieted, one might walk near it and feel the air shift with memory. To stand in the shadow of the intact side, to gaze across the emptiness where the southern wall had been, was to feel time itself pressing close. The ruin whispered of the day when stones had fallen, when the ground had shaken, when the world itself had shuddered beneath the feet of Rome. Yet those who lived nearby did not always see it as loss. Some saw opportunity. Fallen blocks could be used elsewhere, dragged off to build houses, churches, walls. And so the earthquake's destruction became the city's resource. The Colosseum's broken skin was slowly carried away, one stone at a time. What nature had shaken loose, human hands would claim. But that is for later in our story. For now, we linger in this moment, the moment of breaking, the moment after the quake. The amphitheater, once whole, now broken. The silence that followed. The dust settling across marble steps. The ivy creeping slowly into cracks. Let the image rest in your mind, the Colosseum with its wound, open to the sky. The sun setting on jagged stone. The air cooling, carrying with it the faint smell of dust and herbs. And somewhere, softly, the crickets begin their night song. And in the background, through the broken arches, the city's hearths kept burning, their smoke rising quietly into the still Roman night. Quarry of a city. The earthquakes had left the Colosseum scarred, its southern wall broken, its stones loosened. And in the centuries that followed, Rome itself was changing. The empire had long since faded. The city was no longer the teeming heart of the ancient world, but a quieter place, a shadow of its former self. Houses were fewer, streets were emptier, and many of the great temples stood in ruin. Amid this landscape, the Colosseum loomed, still vast, still commanding, but no longer filled with cheering crowds. And when a city shrinks, when resources grow scarce, people look to what remains around them. The Colosseum, with its endless ranks of travertine blocks and iron clamps, became not only a ruin, but a resource. A quarry waiting silently in the heart of Rome. In the Middle Ages, masons and builders walked its corridors not to admire its grandeur, but to measure and select. They saw in each fallen stone not history, but possibility. A slab of marble could become part of an altar. A block of travertine might serve as a foundation for a palace. The iron pins, once holding arches firm, could be pried loose and melted into nails. And so, little by little, the Colosseum was carried away. The fallen stones, shaken loose by earthquakes, were easiest to claim. Carts creaked under their weight as oxen pulled them through narrow streets, the sound of wheels grinding against cobblestone echoing through the alleys. These stones found new homes in churches, in basilicas, in noble houses. To walk through medieval Rome was, in some ways, to walk through fragments of the amphitheater, scattered and reborn. St. Peter's Basilica, rising on the Vatican Hill, carries within its walls stones once shaded by the Colosseum's arches. Palaces of popes and cardinals bear the same inheritance. Even ordinary houses made use of small fragments. The amphitheater that had once been a symbol of imperial might was slowly dissolved into the fabric of a Christian city. Let us pause here, and imagine the work. A mason climbs the ruin, hammer in hand. He wedges iron into a crack, pries at a block loosened by time. The sound is steady, rhythmic, stone against metal, echoing faintly through the hollow corridors. Dust drifts into the air. A block groans, shifts, then falls with a dull thud, sending up a small cloud that settles into the weeds below. From there, ropes are tied, pulleys creak, and slowly, the stone is dragged toward the waiting cart. A process not rushed, but patient, repeated day after day, year after year. For the people of Rome in these centuries, the Colosseum was not untouchable. It was not a monument of reverence, not yet. It was practical. It was useful. And its grandeur, though still impressive, was outweighed by its abundance of building material. The amphitheater had become a quarry, and its stones traveled outward like seeds scattered by wind. This quiet dismantling reshaped its form. Where once the arches had stood filled with statues, now gaps yawned empty. Where once the walls had shown smooth and steady, now jagged edges revealed the hollowness within. As the outer layers were peeled away, the inner skeleton of the Colosseum became visible, like the bones of a creature long gone. Yet even as it was stripped, it endured. Enough remained to suggest its former greatness. Enough remained to impress travelers who came to Rome and saw the immense curve still rising above the rooftops. To them, even half gone, it was greater than anything in their own lands. They marveled at the size of the arches, the vastness of the circle, the thought of what it must have been when whole. But for Romans themselves, the quarrying was ordinary. Stone was needed, and there it stood. And so, quietly, the amphitheater gave itself to the city, piece by piece. There is something almost gentle in this image. Not the sudden violence of earthquakes, not the roar of collapse, but the slow, deliberate unbuilding. The sound of chisels tapping, the scrape of stone being hauled, the creak of carts. No great drama, only steady labor. The Colosseum fading, not in a single moment, but in centuries of patient dismantling. And as it faded, life around it went on. Chickens scratched in the dust near its arches. Children played in its shadow, climbing on fallen blocks as if on playground stones. Goats grazed in the grass that now grew where crowds had once roared. A ruin was not an isolated thing. It was part of the living city, part of its rhythm. At night, when the work was done, silence returned. The carts gone, the masons home, the Colosseum rested in the dark. Its wounds deeper, its form less complete, but still steady. The moonlight fell on its jagged edges, turning them pale, softening the harshness. The city slept, and the ruins slept with it. To think of the Colosseum as a quarry is to think of history not only as loss, but as transformation. Its stones did not vanish. They became walls and pillars elsewhere. They stood in sanctuaries, in palaces, in cloisters. They were carried forward, repurposed, reshaped, and through them, the amphitheater lived on, not whole, but dispersed. A monument scattered into fragments, still present, yet no longer in one place. And so, as centuries passed, the Colosseum's other half disappeared not only into dust, but into the city itself. To touch the stone of St. Peter's was, in some sense, to touch the Colosseum. To walk in a medieval palace was, in some way, to walk through the amphitheater reborn. Rome had consumed its own monument, quietly, steadily, until what remained was a skeleton of the whole. Let the image settle. The Colosseum, vast but incomplete. Arches broken, stones missing, gaps yawning where once there was strength. Yet all around the city, fragments lived on, hidden in plain sight, carrying the memory of what had once been whole. The chisels grow quiet. The carts are gone. The night deepens, and the amphitheater stands in shadow, half present, half absent, half stone, half memory. And in the background, beyond the broken arches, a dog barks once, then the city falls into hush again, while the embers of hearths glow softly in the Roman dark. A fortress of shadows. The Colosseum had already lost part of itself to the trembling of the earth, and part to the patient chisels of masons. Yet the story of its disappearance is not only one of stone falling or stone being carried away. For a time, the great amphitheater was claimed for a very different purpose. It ceased to be a stage for games. It ceased to be merely a ruin. Instead, it became a fortress, a place of defense, of shadow, of watchful eyes. In the Middle Ages, Rome was not the Rome of emperors. It was a city of narrow streets, of small houses clustered among ruins, of families vying for power. Noble clans ruled in fragments, each guarding their quarter with towers and walls. The city, though holy as the seat of the popes, was not always peaceful. Rival families fought, bandits prowled, and the Tiber itself sometimes overflowed, carrying unrest in its waters. The Colosseum, immense and half empty, stood there still, and in its vastness some saw opportunity. The Frangipani family, one of the powerful Roman houses, laid claim to it. They fortified its arches, closed its gates, built towers upon its frame. The amphitheater that had once echoed with lions' roars and gladiators' cries now echoed with the tramp of armored boots. Imagine entering then, not as a spectator of games, but as a soldier. The arches barred with iron, the corridors dark with smoke from fires. Horses tethered where once senators sat. Guards stationed on the tiers, watching from the same seats that had once held cheering crowds. The arena below no longer a stage, but a courtyard where weapons were stored, where soldiers drilled, where banners hung from stone walls. The Colosseum had changed its role. Once it was a symbol of empire, now it was a symbol of clan power. To hold it was to command prestige, to show strength in the fractured city. Its sheer size made it defensible, its thick walls hard to breach, its many entrances easy to guard. A fortress ready-made, built by emperors, repurposed by nobles. But it was not a fortress of glory. Its grandeur had faded, its stone was broken, its corridors were cold. Fires smoked beneath its arches, leaving soot where once marble gleamed. Wooden barricades blocked paths that had been designed for smooth flow. And in the night, when the city slept uneasily, the Colosseum loomed darker than ever, its arches like watching eyes, its silence heavier. Let us pause and picture it in detail. A torch flickers against the cracked wall, casting shadows long and wavering. A guard shifts his weight, the sound of metal clinking softly. In the upper arches, the wind moves through, carrying with it the faint cry of an owl. The once open, welcoming structure now feels closed, secretive, inward-looking. Where once there had been spectacle, now there is suspicion. For centuries, the Colosseum was passed from one power to another, its role as fortress lingering. At times it sheltered not just soldiers, but families, animals, entire communities who made their homes in its shadowed corners. The amphitheater was no longer a place of one purpose. It became a patchwork of lives, each carving out a space in the ruin. The fortress years left marks. Holes were cut into walls to hold wooden beams. Partitions were raised. Stones were blackened with smoke. The amphitheater aged in these centuries, not only as a ruin, but as a dwelling, as a keep. And yet, even in this role, it remained what it had always been: vast, commanding, inescapable. A presence in the city, whether as spectacle or as fortress, whether as glory or as ruin. Rome without the Colosseum was unthinkable, even when it stood not as a crown, but as a shadow. At night, in those medieval centuries, to walk past the Colosseum was to feel its darkness keenly. The city had little light then, only torches and small fires. The amphitheater loomed like a black mountain, its arches hollow, its towers sharp against the sky. Dogs barked faintly in the distance. Horses stamped their hooves within. The echo of laughter or quarrel drifted from inside, muffled, uncertain. It was no longer the roar of crowds, it was the murmur of a fortress life. But like all things in Rome, this too was not permanent. Over time, the Colosseum ceased even to be a fortress. Families shifted power. Towers were abandoned. Soldiers moved elsewhere. The amphitheater returned again to quiet, a half-used ruin, its stones still vanishing, its forms still changing. The fortress was only one chapter in its long story, a brief interlude in which it wore the armor of defense rather than the crown of spectacle. And so, we see the Colosseum as layered. An amphitheater. A ruin. A quarry. A fortress. Each identity adding to its history, each leaving traces still visible in stone. Today, we walk through its arches and see not only the arena of games, but the shadows of soldiers, the remnants of barricades, the memory of banners hung against cracked walls. Let us end this section quietly, with an image. The Colosseum in the Middle Ages, half ruined, half fortified. Torches flickering in the arches. The faint neigh of a horse in the darkness. The wind whistling through broken stones. And beyond the walls, the city hushed, its fires burning low, its streets emptied of life. The Colosseum sleeps as fortress, a fortress of shadows. And in the background, the low crackle of campfires glows faintly, their smoke curling into the night sky, dissolving slowly among the stars. Pilgrims and crosses. The Colosseum had been an amphitheater, a quarry, and a fortress. It had echoed with crowds, then with chisels, then with the footsteps of guards. But history is never a straight line. Each age looks at ruins differently, and each gives them a new layer of meaning. In time, the Colosseum was seen not only as a structure of stone, but as sacred ground. The Middle Ages had filled Rome with Christian memory. Stories of martyrs lingered in the air, tales of early believers who had suffered and died under pagan rule. Some of these tales were embroidered with legend, others rooted in truth, yet all carried a deep weight. The Colosseum, immense and haunting in its ruin, became associated with that memory. People whispered that here, beneath its vast arches, Christians had been thrown to wild beasts. That here, in its sand, the blood of martyrs had soaked deep into the earth. Whether or not the stories were precise mattered less than the reverence they stirred. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the Colosseum had become a place of pilgrimage. Pilgrims walking to Rome, weary from long journeys across mountains and plains, would step through its arches in quiet awe. They no longer saw it as a fortress, or even as a ruin to plunder, but as a shrine, solemn, heavy with memory. A great cross was raised in its arena, simple yet profound. Around it, the stations of the cross were marked, so that pilgrims might walk the circle in prayer, retracing the steps of Christ's Passion within the walls of the ancient amphitheater. The echo of footsteps now was not that of soldiers or spectators, but of pilgrims moving slowly, whispering prayers in low voices, their breath misting in the cool Roman air. Imagine it, a line of pilgrims entering at dawn, their cloaks dusty from travel, their sandals worn. They walk in silence, heads bowed, candles flickering faintly in their hands. The Colosseum, though broken, enfolds them in its vast circle, its arches rising into the pale morning sky. As they pause at each station, their voices join in murmured hymns, rising softly and then fading into the ruined stillness. The arena, once filled with roars, now filled with prayer. For the Church, this transformation was powerful. The Colosseum had been a monument of empire, of violence, of spectacle. To claim it as a site of martyrdom was to turn its meaning on its head. What had once been pagan, cruel, and worldly became instead a vessel of faith, sanctified by memory and devotion. The ruin was given a new dignity, not as a symbol of Rome's might, but of endurance through suffering. And so, the Colosseum entered another chapter in its long life. Pilgrims continued to visit, popes walked its circles, ceremonies were held within its broken walls. At times, efforts were made to preserve what remained, to keep it as a holy place rather than a quarry. The cross in its arena stood as a marker, a reminder, a quiet declaration that the ruin had found a new life in faith. Yet the atmosphere remained hushed, subdued. It was not a church, not entirely. It was still too vast, too broken, too wild with plants and silence to be fully enclosed in liturgy. Instead, it became a space of contemplation, a place where the ruin itself was part of the prayer. The jagged walls spoke of times passing. The absent stones spoke of loss. The arches opened to the sky spoke of eternity. To pray in the Colosseum was to be reminded that earthly empires crumble, but faith endures. Travelers wrote of this feeling. Some described the ruin as melancholy, others as sublime. To stand within it was to feel both the weight of history and the fragility of human works. To walk its circle in prayer was to place one's small footsteps into a vast continuum of time. And always, above, the open sky, whether blue in the day or dark with stars, framed by arches like windows into infinity. The Colosseum as sacred ground did not erase its other identities. The memory of its use as quarry lingered. Its use as fortress left scars. But now it carried another layer, one that softened its harshness, one that turned its ruin into something contemplative. It was not only a place of stone, it was a place of spirit. Picture, for a moment, a quiet evening service. A few candles burning at the foot of the cross, their flames trembling in the breeze that drifts through broken arches. A small group gathered, chanting softly, their voices echoing faintly across the empty arena. The stone walls catch the sound, stretch it, blur it, until it becomes less voice and more hum, more vibration, as if the Colosseum itself is humming with them. And then silence returns, thick, gentle, settling once more across the ruin. For pilgrims, this silence was part of the devotion. To walk where countless lives had passed, to pray where time itself seemed to pause, this was the gift of the Colosseum. It did not need to be whole to inspire reverence. Its brokenness was, in a way, part of its sanctity. And so the amphitheater endured another transformation. From stone circle to holy circle, from games to prayers, from shouts to whispers. Let us pause here and let the image rest. The Colosseum by moonlight, its cross standing pale against the dark arena floor. Pilgrims kneeling quietly, their cloaks pulled tight against the night air. The sound of distant bells ringing from the city's churches. The ruin itself, still and vast, watching as prayers rise like smoke into the starlit sky. The amphitheater, once drenched in spectacle, now filled with solemn reverence. And in the background, the faint murmur of prayer drifts with the night wind, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves, until all blends into silence. Gardens among the ruins. As centuries passed, the Colosseum was never left entirely empty. It shifted roles, it gathered meanings, and in its hollowed arches, life always found its way back. By the Renaissance and into the early modern age, the amphitheater had settled into a quieter existence. The days of soldiers had faded, the pilgrims still came, and yet another transformation began, one born not of men, but of nature. For the Colosseum became a garden. It was not planned, not carefully designed. Seeds drifted on the air, carried by winds from the hills, dropped by birds resting in the arches, borne on the sandals of travelers. They found their way into cracks in the stone, into pockets of earth that had gathered in the fallen masonry, into corners where rainwater lingered. And there, in silence and patience, they grew. At first it was small. Tufts of grass sprouting where marble had once gleamed. Moss softening the edges of blocks. But with time, larger plants took root. Bushes. Wildflowers. Even small trees. The amphitheater, once a symbol of Rome's power, became a host for wild nature. Its arena floor sprouted greenery. Its upper levels grew tangled with vines. Travelers who entered often remarked upon the sight, the Colosseum not just as ruin, but as wilderness. Imagine walking within it then. You step beneath an arch, expecting only stone, but find instead a garden. Sunlight filters through the broken walls, striking leaves that sway gently in the breeze. The scent is no longer only of dust and age, but of grass, blossoms, and herbs. Bees hum softly, moving from flower to flower. Birds nest in the hollows, their songs echoing faintly in the vast circle. What was once a place of engineered spectacle is now a place of untamed growth, a stage for nature's slow, persistent play. By the 18th century, scholars and botanists began to notice this transformation with fascination. The Colosseum's microclimate, its sheltered corners, its mix of sunlit and shaded spaces, created a unique haven for plants not usually found together. Travelers catalogued species, marveling at the strange garden flourishing in the heart of ancient stone. Some counted hundreds of varieties, collected like treasures in the amphitheater's embrace. It became, in a quiet way, a living museum of both stone and root, ruin and growth. A paradox, and yet a harmony, the structure of empire cradling the delicate persistence of weeds and blossoms. The grandeur of Rome softened by petals. For the people of the time, this wild garden carried meaning. Some saw it as a symbol of decay, of nature reclaiming what men had built. Others saw it as a symbol of renewal, of beauty rising even from ruin. For pilgrims, it added to the sacred aura of the site, the cross in the arena surrounded by greenery, as if life itself was blessing the memory of the martyrs. For poets and artists, it became an image of romantic melancholy, the world's mightiest monument dressed in garlands of wildflowers, its silence broken only by birdsong. Step deeper into this image. The sun is lowering, and the light in the Colosseum turns golden. Shadows lengthen across the grass that now carpets the arena. Small blossoms sway on slender stems, their colors soft against the gray of the stone. In the arches above, ivy trails downward, curling in graceful patterns. A blackbird sings from the rim of the upper tier, its notes carrying across the quiet ruin. The sound echoes faintly, lingering in the air long after the song has ceased. Visitors who entered often described the experience as uncanny. To stand in the Colosseum was already to feel the weight of centuries. To stand in it transformed into a garden was to feel that history had softened, that time itself had turned gentle. What had once been filled with blood and sand was now filled with green and light. The arena that had seen death now bloomed with life. Of course, not all saw this as a blessing. Some, more practical in spirit, worried that the plants would hasten the ruin's decay. Roots pressing into cracks, moisture seeping into stone. Efforts were made at times to clear the growth, to prune back the wildness. But nature always returned, always resilient, always patient. And so, the Colosseum wore its garden cloak for centuries. Artists painted it not only as ruin but as a pastoral scene, a strange mingling of human grandeur and natural quiet. Writers described it in terms both melancholy and sweet, as if the amphitheater itself had chosen to rest, to sleep, to let flowers soothe its wounds. There is something deeply calming in this image, a monument so mighty, yet surrendered to softness. The great circle no longer resounding with crowds, but with the hum of insects. The air no longer filled with dust and cries, but with the perfume of herbs and blossoms. The Colosseum, once a place of tension and spectacle, turned instead into a garden of peace. Close your eyes and imagine standing in its arena at dusk. The sky overhead turns from gold to pale violet, then to blue darkening with stars. Around you, the scent of crushed grass rises in the evening coolness. Above, ivy stirs softly in the breeze. A moth flits silently, its wings pale in the twilight. The Colosseum does not roar now, it sighs. Its silence is vast, its peace deep. Time moves slowly here, as slowly as vines climbing a stone, as slowly as roots pressing into earth. And so we leave this chapter with a quiet understanding. The Colosseum, in its long story, has worn many faces. In this chapter, it wore the face of a garden. Not an empire's jewel, not a fortress's keep, not a quarry's pit, but a meadow enclosed by stone, a sanctuary where nature wrote its own history in leaves and flowers. And in the background, the gentle rustling of grass continues, mingling with the faint hum of bees, until all settles into the deep stillness of evening. The Age of Preservation. For many centuries, the Colosseum was allowed to shift with the tides of time, stone taken away, soldiers moving in, pilgrims whispering prayers, wild plants taking root. But eventually, the world began to change in how it looked at ruins. What was once seen as quarry or fortress, as convenient stone or shelter, became seen as history itself, as treasure to be kept safe. By the 18th and 19th centuries, a new spirit had spread across Europe, the spirit of preservation. Scholars studied the past with fresh devotion. Travelers on the grand tour arrived in Rome with notebooks and pencils, eager to sketch the ruins, to carry home fragments of memory. Artists painted the Colosseum as a symbol of Rome's grandeur. Poets wrote of its melancholy beauty. Slowly, the idea grew stronger. The Colosseum was not to be dismantled, not to be reused, not to be abandoned. It was to be saved. But saving a ruin was no simple task. The Colosseum, by then, stood broken. Whole sections of its outer wall had collapsed. Stones leaned dangerously, arches cracked, stairways crumbled. Earthquakes had shaken it more than once, leaving scars that spread like fractures in old bone. Plants had grown stubbornly into the masonry, widening gaps. And centuries of quarrying had hollowed its strength. To preserve it meant first to protect it from falling further into ruin. So scaffolds were raised. Wooden supports braced leaning walls. Later, iron reinforcements were set into place. Great buttresses of brick and stone were built to steady what remained. If you visit today, you can still see them, enormous wedges of masonry, pressing like steady hands against the sides of the amphitheater, holding it upright. At the time, they were not meant to restore the Colosseum to its former shape. They were meant simply to keep it standing. Preservation in those early years was as much symbolic as practical. It was a declaration that Rome's ruins were not refuse, not to be carted away, but heritage to be respected. Popes decreed protection. Antiquarians recorded details with loving care. Artists captured the ruin as it was, so that its image might be carried into the minds of those who had never seen it. Imagine the scene in the early 19th century, workers clambering carefully along the upper tiers, their hammers and chisels echoing faintly as they set supports in place. Below, visitors stroll with sketchbooks, pausing to draw the vast arches, noting the play of light and shadow across broken stone. A guide, with quiet voice, recounts legends of gladiators and martyrs, while the wind sighs through the arches overhead. The ruin is no longer being consumed. It is being studied, steadied, saved. In this period, the Colosseum also took on a new role in the eyes of Rome's people and of visitors from afar. It became a mirror for reflection. For some, it represented the might of Rome, now humbled. For others, it was a reminder of faith and sacrifice. For still others, it was a romantic symbol of the passage of time, of the impermanence of all human works. Standing within it was like standing inside history itself, inside the long echo of centuries. The shift toward preservation was gradual, and it faced challenges. Money was scarce. Political change swept across Europe, Napoleon's campaigns, the rise of new nations, the unification of Italy. Yet through all this, the Colosseum remained, and the desire to protect it remained too. Each generation added its care, however modest, layering support upon support, each act a quiet promise that the ruin would endure. The preservation efforts also changed the way the Colosseum looked. Where once wild plants had grown unchecked, they were cleared away in great part, leaving the stone bare again. Where once parts of the ruin had crumbled freely, now they were braced. The amphitheater began to resemble less a ruin in decay and more a monument in care. It still bore the scars of time, but those scars were now guarded, not ignored. The age of preservation also brought with it visitors in ever greater numbers. No longer just pilgrims or scholars, but travelers from across the world. The Colosseum became a destination, a place that stirred the imagination of countless hearts. To walk within its circle was to step into a story larger than oneself. And preservation made this possible, by ensuring that the structure, though broken, would not fall entirely into dust. Let us pause to picture a quiet evening in the 19th century. The workers have gone for the day. The scaffolds stand tall, shadows stretching long across the arena floor. A lone traveler lingers, sketchbook in hand, gazing up at the broken rim of the amphitheater silhouetted against the fading sky. Around him, the ruin is silent, except for the soft rustle of paper as he draws, and the faint call of a bird settling into its nest high among the arches. The Colosseum, though wounded, holds steady. It endures, and in enduring it teaches. This was the gift of preservation. Not to restore the Colosseum to its imperial glory, that was never possible, and never truly desired, but to allow it to continue existing, to continue speaking across time. Its voice was now gentler, quieter, but no less powerful. A voice that said, "Here, in these stones, lies history. Here lies the memory of empire, the memory of struggle, the memory of endurance." And so, the Colosseum entered yet another chapter. From arena to quarry, from fortress to shrine, from garden to monument under care. Each age had left its mark. Each had taken something away or added something new. And now, the age of preservation had given the Colosseum its chance to remain, not for use, but for remembrance. Let us close this section with a gentle vision. The Colosseum at dusk, its great arches glowing softly in the last light. Scaffolds rising like slender trees, steadying what leans. The air is quiet, save for the distant sound of evening bells drifting through the city. The ruin stands, broken yet unbroken, its vast circle etched against the night sky. And in the background, the hush of twilight deepens, folding the Colosseum into the embrace of history, holding it in stillness, as stars begin to shimmer faintly above. The Colosseum today. The Colosseum still stands. After nearly 2,000 years, it rises above the city of Rome, half whole, half vanished, yet entirely unforgettable. Tourists flock to it now, filling its arches with footsteps and voices, cameras in hand, eyes lifted toward its vast circle. But beneath the bustle, beneath the chatter, the Colosseum remains what it has always been, a presence, a witness, a keeper of time. To see it today is to see layers of history all at once. The broken outer wall, with its gaping absence, tells of earthquakes and centuries of quarrying. The brick buttresses, firm and steady, tell of the age of preservation. The crosses within whisper of the pilgrims who once walked its circle in prayer. And the faint traces of cut stones, missing blocks, and patched walls tell of the years when it was fortress, garden, or home. Each age lingers, like voices overlapping in a chorus, none erasing the others, all speaking together. Visitors step onto the arena floor, reconstructed now in part, so that one can stand where gladiators once stood. The air is warm in summer, cool in winter, yet always touched by a faint sense of vastness. Above, the tiers rise like a hollow mountain, their arches framing slices of sky. When the sun pours down, it fills the ruin with light so bright it seems almost alive again. When clouds drift overhead, the light softens, and shadows move slowly across the stone like memories passing. Yet the Colosseum is no longer a place of spectacle. It is instead a place of learning, of remembrance, of quiet awe. Guides recount stories to groups of travelers, tales of gladiators, of emperors, of martyrs, of earthquakes. Children look up in wonder at the scale. Couples pause to take photographs. Scholars still come to study its structure, its materials, its endurance. And yet, even amid all the voices, the Colosseum holds a silence that is deeper than noise. A silence of centuries, of patience, of endurance beyond all measure. For Rome today, the Colosseum is both symbol and reminder. It appears on coins, on stamps, on postcards. It greets visitors as one of the world's great landmarks. Yet it also reminds the city, and all who see it, that even the greatest works of empire crumble. That time is stronger than stone. That memory is both fragile and enduring. To walk within the Colosseum is to feel small, yet connected to something vast, something greater than any one life. Let us imagine a quiet morning there, before the crowds arrive. The gates are just opening, and the air is still cool, carrying the faint scent of dew from the grass outside. A bird calls from the upper arches, its song clear in the stillness. You step inside, and for a moment you are alone. The arena floor stretches before you, pale with dust, edged with broken walls. The arches rise around you, catching the soft morning light. The Colosseum feels less like a ruin and more like a memory, enormous, gentle, steady. Or imagine an evening, after the visitors have gone. The sun sets behind the broken wall, and the Colosseum glows in warm gold, then fades slowly into shadow. Lights flicker on, illuminating its arches from below, so that it stands against the night like a lantern of stone. The city hums around it, cars passing, people walking, yet within the circle there is calm, as if time moves more slowly here, as if the amphitheater is resting after its long, long story. Today, preservation continues. Archaeologists study, engineers reinforce, curators guide. Parts of the Colosseum have been opened anew, allowing visitors to see the underground chambers where gladiators and animals once waited. Exhibits share artifacts and stories. And always, the ruin is cared for, not to erase its scars, but to honor them. For its brokenness is part of its truth, part of its beauty. In spring, small plants still sometimes grow between its stones, though carefully managed. Birds still circle above, nesting in the hollows. The Colosseum remains not only a monument of the past, but a living part of the city, shaped by weather, by light, by the footsteps of each new visitor. What has disappeared from the Colosseum? The missing half of its outer wall, the marble stripped, the stones carted away, has not lessened it. In a strange way, absence has become part of its presence. The gaps open it to the sky. The missing marble reminds us of all that was, and all that has passed. The ruin's incompleteness is part of what makes it whole in our eyes, whole in its meaning. Standing before it today, one sees not just a ruin, but a long story, the games of empire, the quarry of stone, the fortress of shadows, the shrine of faith, the garden of wildflowers, the monument preserved. Each layer rests upon the others, each whispering softly, each leaving traces in the stone. And so, the Colosseum today is not merely ancient. It is timeless. A place where history gathers and lingers, where silence speaks as clearly as stone. A place that reminds us that all things change, that all things pass, but that memory endures in ways both fragile and strong. Let us close with a final image. The Colosseum by night, quiet, immense. Its arches lit softly, glowing against the dark. The city murmurs around it, but within, there is only stillness. Stars drift slowly above. The ruin rests, as it has rested through centuries, as it will rest through more to come. The Colosseum sleeps, half whole, half gone, yet entirely present. A monument not only of Rome, but of time itself. And in the background, the night settles deeper, the air cool and still, the great amphitheater breathing quietly in the heart of the eternal city. A gentle good night. And so, dear listener, the Colosseum's story winds softly to rest. We have walked through its many lives together, from the roar of crowds in ancient days, to the silence of stone quarried and carried away, from the shadows of fortress walls to the hushed prayers of pilgrims, from wild gardens blooming in cracks of time, to scaffolds raised in care, to the steady monument we see today. The Colosseum is no longer whole, yet it has never been more complete in meaning. Each absence is part of its presence, each scar a chapter, each silence a voice. To stand before it is to stand before time itself, patient, enduring, and always speaking. And now, as you close your eyes, let the Colosseum rest with you. Imagine its arches glowing softly in the starlight, the night air cool and gentle, the city murmuring faintly beyond its walls. The amphitheater, ancient and vast, sleeps in its circle of stone, keeping watch as it has for centuries. May your thoughts grow calm, your breath grow slow, and your dreams drift as quietly as the night wind through the arches. Sleep well, and let history keep you company, like an old friend, until morning. Good night.